let's dive in. What's up, guys? There's some more people trickling in. Welcome to Industrial Marketing Live. Welcome to my Wednesday edition of it. Had to switch it up on you guys and give you all a curveball. Just kind of how I do things. So I'm here with Natalie. Is it pronounced Burge?
It's a soft G. It's Burge.
Burge. Okay, cool. I got it. So I'm here with Natalie Burge. She's Director of Sales. I'm going to let you kind of describe your bona fides. Natalie can probably do it better than me, but she's sales enablement like master. So go ahead and describe a little bit about you. Okay. And everyone knows me. They're sick of hearing about me.
Yeah, no problem. So I am the new Director of Sales Enablement for the insurance vertical at Affinity. We're an applied AI solution company that what we say to everyone so that it's easy to understand is we've developed an applied AI solution that basically is like eHarmony for call centers, where the customers are calling in and our intelligent routing best pairs you with the customer service agent that's going to produce the most positive outcome for why you're calling. So in a nutshell, that's the company I work for. A lot of what I'll be sharing perspectives on today is going to be from the 10 plus years I spent in the insurance brokerage space, where Matt and I have had many conversations, but industrial marketing and insurance marketing is very similar.
You're like, it's basically the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, eHarmony for call routing, that's what you call it?
Yeah, that's how we refer to it, is the intelligently pairing people. So you have better outcomes when you call into a call center.
Did you people have compatibility scores like eHarmony? And do you have to fill out like a long survey?
No, it's completely disruptionless. Like no one even knows that it's happening.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. All right, so let's dive into it. So we're going to talk about what exactly sales enablement is, and I think the inverse of that is to talk about what it isn't, because I think there's the sales perception of sales enablement, there's a marketing perception of sales enablement, and then there's actually sales enablement, and I think they're all a little different depending on who you ask.
Yeah.
3 pillars. We're going to focus more on 2 of the pillars as opposed to the tech side of it, because there is a tech side of it, but tech's going to be very wildly depending on your business and your needs and your capabilities. And so there is some tech stuff that we'll recommend throughout this. We'll get into frameworks, which I'm very interested in, because it really involves sales, marketing, and customer service. And then we'll talk about the strategic function of sales enablement. And then everyone here has this. I see 10 people on this webinar right now, and they all probably have their one hopeless sales rep who and there's more people joining, but they all have the one hopeless sales rep who, you could literally just morph yourself into their body and they still wouldn't be able to do what you want them to do. So we'll give you some tips on how to work with your hopeless sales rep and make him, more likely than them, more effective at doing sales enablement for you. And then we're going to go through some touch point sequences. We have a cool framework that Natalie's going to walk through. We're not going to walk through all 17 touch points because that would take a long time. We're going to go through kind of the first 4 or so, and then we'll kind of map out the rest of them for you. And then that is available as a take-home piece of content for you in the slide deck, and you can change that for your business and then use it. So it'll involve a whole bunch of stuff. We'll get into it. So, okay. So now I'm done talking because you're the expert here. I'm just the person here hosting this dang thing. So talk a little bit about sales enablement, what it is and what it is, and go through each of these points, because top is perception, bottom is reality, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad that you opened with what sales enablement is not, because this is something that I see people struggling with day in and day out. Marketing is generally confused if a sales enablement team evolves in an organization. They're like, well, where do the lines end with what we do and what you're trying to do? And then sales just tends to receive it as, oh, great, now we have minions to go and do our bidding with all the things that we need done. So I look at sales enablement much more strategically, and it's born out of my past experience with marketing and being in brand experience, where I look at the sales professional, because in a lot of organizations, that sales professional is the first touch point on the customer journey with that company, where there are a lot of organizations out there that that their marketing efforts might not be quite as mature as they need to be. So they're heavily reliant upon the sales professional. And so I really think that you stand to gain a lot of positive associations with your brand whenever you think about the sales professional as being a brand ambassador. So that's kind of my jumping off point for how I look at sales enablement. And today in the modern B2B selling buying landscape, a lot of sales professionals haven't evolved to the place where they understand that they have to kind of become content marketers. It's a gross phrase that they don't want to adopt at all, but that's the reality of it. And so a lot of my work for the past few years has spent to kind of make it more palatable for, let's say, a more traditional 20 plus years in sort of sales professional to be able to slightly pivot in their brain and understand that their go-to-sales motion that they've been working with in the past is not entirely defunct, but it needs to evolve. That skill set needs to evolve a little bit more with how buyers are consuming content today. So content marketing is a skill set that buyers need to learn. And also a lot of the sellers that I've worked with in the past never really had a deep understanding of who they were selling to. So I see this as an opportunity for sales enablement to fill that gap and to kind of be like a mini research house to enable the sellers to more effectively relate to buyers. And through doing that and doing it well, you enable buyers to have a better buying experience. And then it's all about relationship building, quite honestly. You spend most of your day trying to find the right people in your own company to develop those positive relationships with them so that they want to help you, because there's so much that a sales enabler needs to do that is dependent upon other people. So winning the hearts and minds of your fellow coworkers is critical.
Yeah. And I mean, look, sales enablement is content marketing, and sales enablement is, I just look at it as another form of distribution, right? Instead of like a one-to-many distribution, like it would be with email or with paid social or with SEO. If your company did well at SEO, it's a one-to-few or a one-to-one. And there's a different tack that you take with that kind of distribution, right? And so and we'll get into these components, but it's a lot of training, because most sales reps in insurance and in industrial, there's not a robust inside sales team for a lot of these organizations, or historically there has not been. It's a lot of regional guys who are remotely based, going to dealers, going visiting people. And now that most relationship building is happening via email, via Zoom calls like this, via cold calling or like slightly warm calling. You need to not they're not prepared to sell like that. You know what I mean? And so, and you know what the worst part about that is? Neither is their sales director probably either, because they probably came up doing territorial sales where they were going and taking hands and taking people out to lunch and doing that stuff. So it's really the marketing, the marketer who's been doing that stuff, and sales guys like, what value does it have? This is actually where you have an opportunity to lend more value to your sales team than maybe you even realize.
Exactly.
They don't know how to do this as well as you do, which is funny because it's sales in reality, but you're really doing a lot of marketing techniques in order to do it effectively. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And one of the things that we were kind of figuring out over the last 12 months in the organization that I left behind is that a lot of the marketing folks that we were working with had been so good about communicating one-to-many, right? So they were being tasked by a lot of the sales professionals, because they didn't know necessarily that they could go through sales enablement, but for help with like, how do I write emails that are a little bit more dialed into a specific type of buyer? So it was actually an opportunity. Sales enablement became like the darling in the company over the last 12 months, because we kind of had our hand in on both sides and could kind of educate sales, educate marketing with how we could all work more effectively with each other.
For sure. So let's get into these pillars really quickly here, because you know these and I know some of these, and I like my cool little content graphic that I pulled. But this is it right here, right? These are the three main pillars. So we talked content, operational tech, and then the big part is sales coaching and training. Now everyone's looking at their marketer and they're like, how qualified am I to do sales coaching and training? Can you speak to that a little bit? We're going to get into more detail, but just sort of whet the palate.
Yeah, so sales coaching and training is its own discipline in and of itself, but in a lot of companies, it falls to either marketing or it falls to sales enablement. or it falls to one person in the sales team to kind of help in this regard. But the way I look at it from an enablement perspective is you only have control over certain things with regard to the sales professional. So it's that I focus on things as simple as like email writing. How do we write our emails in a way that are more receptive to the individual who you want to create a relationship with? And then also a big part of it is like, how do you show up on LinkedIn and leverage that space more strategically? So those are the two areas that I kind of moved into with regard to sales coaching and training.
Sure. All right. So let's pop into this mental framework, because I think one thing that you need to look at as a marketer is your customer is actually not who your salesperson is selling to. Your customer is actually your salesperson, right?
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, because that was one of the stumbling blocks that we had, was that a lot of times marketing would create content for the end customer and then just toss it over the fence to sales, assuming that sales knows what to do with it. Well, they don't. They never know what to do with it. They're just like, this is a lot of interesting stuff, but where am I supposed to use it? How am I supposed to use it? Who am I supposed to use it with? At what point in the sales cycle does this make sense? And so that's where I feel like sales enablement or marketers wearing that hat can really think about the sales professional and all the questions that are going to go through their head when they get your piece of content, and address that on the front side. When you're handing them something, be very prescriptive about what it is they need to know about this information, like why they should give 15 minutes to reading it themselves so that they become more knowledgeable, and then how to use it, where to use it, when to use it, who to use it with.
Yeah. I also like this last point about the relationship building with customer service, because that to me is that's a missing component, I think, for a lot of marketers in terms of getting like ground floor stuff on content ideas, like because content could be anything for you. It could be manuals, drawings, it could be, little checklist how-tos, but customer service is going to give you a lot of that info if you keep a feedback loop into them. I think it's really easy to stay in that, just the one kind of loop between sales and marketing, but customer service is that other component of it where they're really on the ground floor, figuring out what people are looking for after you make a sale, which would be the same things that people may be looking for before even considering you in the first place.
Yeah, totally. I mean, customer service is going to have their thumb on the pulse of the ebb and flow of the customer. So one of the things that I think is really important is if you can build those relationships with the customer service reps and also like prime them on the kinds of things that they should be listening for, because you're just one resource. You're not going to be able to listen in on all of these calls. But if you can almost get them to a place of understanding the kinds of information that you're looking for to create those feedback loops, they can become your best friend, because then they can feed you all of this kind of stuff, and you get a leg up on what's happening in the market, so that then you can go research and figure out what exactly you need to develop in terms of content to supply your sales teams.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so we talked about that framework. I kind of screwed up my own little graphic here, but it's basically you get to be the bridge between customer service and sales, you and marketing. So let's get a little bit into like making sales enablement a strategic function. So let's talk me a little bit through what that means and how that works.
Yeah, so like I was saying at the beginning, if you think about enabling your sellers with the intent of helping them connect more in a more human way with people they ultimately want to build relationships with, get meetings with, close business with, then you're actually approaching it from the perspective of buying or enabling buyers to work more effectively with your sales reps, because we all have a standard of a baseline understanding of how sales is, right? We all have certain biases in our mind about what it means to feel sold to. So enabling sellers to be better at connecting with buyers is going to help the buyer have a better experience with that sales rep. So when I think about upskilling the sales team, I'm really thinking about how do we understand where they're coming from? They generally have some kind of history of selling to a specific buyer type or within a specific industry, but upskilling is also about going a level deeper. So I'm helping them figure out how to segment further than whatever they've been using. We did a lot of exercises where we were developing ICPs within broad categories, because historically we were only looking at industry verticals, and we knew a title that we were selling to, but we needed to go a little bit deeper. So we did ICP exercises, we did persona exercises, but getting them to a place of nuance, I think, is really important for a modern sales team.
Mhm.
And then one thing that's really important is helping empower the sales rep to understand that whatever marketing provides, that is something that they can actually take and create their own create their own content from that. And this is where I spend a lot of my time, is helping them understand that just because marketing produced a 4-page brochure does not mean that you have to use it in its entirety. You can look
Right.
at that, digest it, hack it apart. It can become 6 different pieces of content for you, so that you are then feeding out something that's a little bit more palatable
Mhm.
for buyers over a time horizon, so that you're not just throwing the kitchen sink at them, because that
Yeah.
tends to be a little bit overwhelming.
Mhm.
And then, of course, think about how they need quick wins. So looking at what their day-to-day activities are and seeing where they're spending their time and saying, okay, you've got a lot of time spent over here. How much ROI are you getting off of that time investment? Could we do something differently with this time that you could see more smaller wins that would make you feel like you're progressing in your sales process a little bit faster?
Yeah, the repurposing and redistributing content, I think, is a big thing, because I can tell you the trap that my sales team would fall into often would be, as soon as they got a lead, is throwing the product catalog
Yes.
away, right? And it's like, dude, no, that's not what you're supposed to do. Like, that's the last thing you almost want to give them the catalog after they buy the product from you, because honestly, what you're giving them is a big spare parts list. I mean,
Right.
that's what you're
Yeah.
giving them more than anything. I mean, walk them through, like, coach them, guide them through this buying process, and don't just
Yeah.
blindly give them and think they're going to magically come back and buy from you or ask you a question. So the repurposing, I think, is a really good point, because you look at repurposing content, and I think a lot of salespeople just think, well, marketing's already made this and it works for every channel the
Yeah.
exact same way, right? So all you gotta do is just give them this link, give them this link, give them this
Mhm.
link, and they're just gonna open all of it, right?
Right.
I had one sales guy one time who, like, and I was gonna say this for later, I want to say it now. I had this one guy who I love him to death. His name's Phil, and so he would get a lead that was marketing qualified, and the first thing he would do is he would send an email, and he would send them 12 pieces of content with a link to everything. It would
Yeah.
be blog posts, download this
Mhm.
ebook, here's the YouTube videos, and it's like, Phil, like, nobody is going to open all of those links. You're gonna get like spam. They're gonna go, who the heck is this guy?
Mhm.
And you're just blindly sending links without a lot of context behind it. And the thing that I think you should always recognize about your prospect, and you should be what your coaching sales team is, like, anyone who you're selling to or marketing to, path the least resistance. I want to process that
Mhm.
information really, really quickly. And then I want to decide, my brain wants to decide instantly, all right, am I intrigued by that or am I not? Is
Right.
it going to stop me in my tracks, or am I not? So even showing your team how to do something as simple as, hey, take this brochure, take the screenshot of this graph in this brochure, and then
Mhm.
here's one big point you want to make about that graph, and then say, hey, are you interested in talking more about this, or can I send you more information regarding this? And then let that be a segue
Yeah.
into sending more robust content. But simply just trying to slam something that's like an 8-page brochure or a 1,500-word blog post, overkill.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I spend a lot of time helping our sellers understand that sales cycles take so long because of how we're going to market,
Mhm.
right? We are making the assumption that everyone is just waiting for what we have to share with them,
Yeah.
and the truth is that only 3% of the market is in active buying mode. So if you know that as a seller, all of the time that you're out there fishing, just trying to get a bite, you may get a bite once in a while, but most of your efforts are going to be spent trying to educate that 97% up to the point that they're hungry for what it is that you sell or
Right.
solve for, so that they're finally raising their hand over a period of time and saying, your stuff. I want to talk to you. And I think that is the biggest struggle that a lot of sales professionals have, is
They want the
really
hat.
adopting that mental shift of, like, I do have to understand how people want to consume small amounts of information over a long period of time, and not just like throw all of this dense,
Mhm.
product catalog at them, and hope that they raise their hand. Like, it's just not an efficient use of their time either.
Yeah. The mental shift is two things. It's taking a long-term approach to sales, which is hard for a lot of salespeople to swallow, because they have quotas they have to
Yeah.
meet month over month. But doing things with a long-term mindset will actually help you get your short-term results faster if you commit to it. And then humanizing yourself. I mean, I think another problem, and we're going to talk about it right here, but like, I think a lot of salespeople want to sound very, bland and boring. And they think that by being safe, you're not going to annoy anyone or inspire anyone either. But guess what? Like I saw something on LinkedIn. I'll find this thing while I hand this off to you. But nobody's going to get inspired or act on something that's like, bland and boring. Like, you need to be human. You need to be relational. You need to be cultivating all the time, finding common ground. And that's what's going to actually engender a human connection. So, so tell me some things that you've done to get them to think, because you're getting your sales guy to think as a content marketer.
Yes.
So how do you get them to adopt that?
Yeah. So we would sit down initially and we would take a look at like a lot of what they had been sending and preparing themselves and sending out. And one of the things that I noticed is a lot of our sales professionals tended to be overly formal in how they communicated through email and their phone scripts, where it sounded mechanical, it sounded corporate, it sounded like marketing jargon for that particular business line. And it just kind of, we hacked it apart and we're like, if you were on the receiving end of this, do you want to engage with this human? Why is it that we have this assumption that we have to sound overly formal? So the first exercise we went through is taking a lot of their templates, and as simple as just using conjunctions. Instead of saying, we are XYZ, we would just say we're. Like, let's make it a little bit more reflective of how people actually speak, because again, our objective is to create relationships. And if you're coming across overly formal, it's really difficult to create that kind of relationship. So that was one thing we would do, is just simplify the language and a lot of the messaging that they were already doing, because I found that was a small win that we could create before we got to a place where we were like completely restructuring how they were writing their emails. It was, we needed to kind of win the hearts and minds of the sales professionals. And so doing this simple exercise of like deformalizing the language was an easy way that we could get their favor. And then I love what you have on the screen here. One of the things that was really successful with our teams is that we would have a workshop where we would take a look at a brochure or a one-pager that marketing had produced, which in its entirety was great, but it may not be the single most fitting asset for the scenario or the use case that you needed to communicate something to a would-be buyer. So what we would do is we'd pull it up on screen. We'd say, okay, you see this really cool statistic over here on the side, or this poll quote, or this whatever, and take a screenshot of that. And then, because this has already been approved through compliance and legal and everybody else, you can take some of the text that's surrounding that graphic that says something interesting that you think your buyer would find compelling, copy it, put it into a workable space like a Microsoft Word document or like a clean email window pane. And then make it sound like it's your own opinion. You, the sales rep, who they want to have a relationship with, and you want to have a relationship with them, just change some of the language so it doesn't sound like it's the company's opinion, but it's your opinion. So you're setting yourself up as the knowledgeable expert, and you're using a lot of this language that has already been written out by marketing and approved through the certain processes and channels. So that went over really well, because they felt like they learned a new skill that they could do on the fly with all of this great content that marketing had produced. Getting them to sit down and dedicate the time, that was when we were looking at, how are you spending your days? What are the activities you're doing in your days that's truly producing measurable results against the timeline that you're working against? And so we started introducing, setting time blocks, focus on creating content for yourself to share with your buyers 1 hour a week, and understand your buyers, pull out your personas, your ICPs, look at all of the content that marketing has created, and how can you start creating your own short form content from what they've produced. And then we did, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. No, you were gonna say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and then a lot of our training was on our sales teams on average would send 3 emails to a prospect before they would completely give up. And we had been working with SalesLoft as our platform for modernizing distribution of messages and cadences and engagement with buyers. And we were relying on a lot of their statistics. And so we had to educate our sales professionals that across the board, with everyone who's working in the sales function, it was an average of like 15 touches with a buyer before you even got two-way engagement. So everyone who was giving up after 3 touches, you had no chance.
Right.
So we started developing these touch sequences of multi-touch with like bite-sized information, so that everyone had a better shot at educating that buyer to the point where they might be ready to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, so a couple of things I want to add to that. First off, the giving up after 3 touches is, that you're never going to succeed if you give up on it that quickly. With if your sales members do, it's on you as a marketer to help develop enough touch points, and you should vary it up, which we'll get into. I will say, like, just go look at your own sales cycle. Like if it takes you 9 months to close a sale, sending 3 emails over a course of 4 weeks and not getting a phone call, you're never, ever going to make headway with that, right? Like, you need to match your sequences, just like you need to match any email marketing that you want to do from an automation standpoint, or you want to match expectations for doing demand gen with paid ads. Like, anything you're doing, like, needs to be measured up against your typical sales cycle. Like, otherwise, you're just setting yourself up for abject failure and disappointment. Like, you have to use that kind of as your North Star for, like, when your sales director says, well, how long is this going to take until I know how long it's working? It's going to take somewhere around the sales cycle, like 1x to 1.5x the typical sales cycle, to actually start seeing and knowing if this works or not.
Yeah.
So if you give something, 10% of the sales cycle, of course it's not going to work, and of course everyone's going to go up, and of course you're going to say this program failed. So you have to look at the metrics of your company and to give yourself sort of the time box. How long should we give this as a program? When it comes to how do I get them to think as content marketers, I'm always a big fan. I did this when I was at Binzel, and I wanted to get content marketing off the ground, not sales enablement, but I just started with one person. So go find the one sales guy at your company who you think you can like you can level up quickly, who has the ability, you think, or the appetite to do this. And if you can get him or her successful at this, they're going to go tell their salespeople, their colleagues, the people who trust them, hey, this thing really works. Natalie knows what she's doing, and I'm getting a lot more traction. The quality of it feels a lot better. I'm getting more responses than I typically would otherwise. So if you feel like you're in this situation where it's like, well, I'm one marketer and I have 12 salespeople and I can't get all of them in a room together, don't worry about it. Start with one. Start with one person. Let them be your use case. Let them be your proof of concept. And if you're successful with them, then they're going to tell the other sales guys, and your sales director will also obviously find out about it too, because they'll keep up on it. And you'll get a lot more buy-in from the other members of your team. And so don't overextend yourself on it. Start small and work your way up.
Yeah, I love that, Matt. That's 100% true. I did that at my last job, where I found 3 sales reps that were hungry and eager to try new things. And we had calls a lot more regularly than I did with anyone else. And it always delighted me that I would get an email from one of them saying, I tried the template that you provided me with this one prospect that I've been going after for 9 months, and they responded the next day. So yeah, you just need one person sometimes.
For sure. I did the content marketing. I did it with one person who wanted to do content with me, and it was successful. And then all of a sudden, when I wanted to go to my key accounts person to do something, they were like, okay, I saw what you did with that guy. I'll do that with you. Right. All right. Let's talk the hopeless sales rep. I love this GIF. I don't even know the swoon. Does anyone watch the swoon? Put a 1 in the chat box if you watch the swoon. But I was just looking for, like, I just typed in hopeless on Giphy. This came up and I thought it was hilarious. So anyway, so Natalie, dealing with your hopeless sales rep. So figuring out why that's happening. So these are the kind of the 3 things. Let's talk through each of these a little bit.
Yeah. So a lot of this would fall to like someone who's designated as a sales coach or a sales manager within an organization. But if you are a marketer or a sales enablement person, I think it's really important to kind of have that initial one-on-one discussion with the sales rep and kind of understand how their day comes together. What are they doing? How are they spending their time? What is their go-to-market methodology? Because they've all been hired at different points and come into your organization with baggage from how they learned this sales process and that sales process. So it's generally kind of all across the board. So being able to isolate and understand like what's going on, and then being able to figure out where are the easy entry points that you could immediately start working with them to help them level up to a place where they're starting to see some successes in their efforts. A lot of times it comes down, and this sounds terrible, but there are a lot of lazy sales reps out there. There's a lot of them that are just not doing the work.
Yeah.
And I think it's just because of old habits. And I think the pandemic probably accelerated I don't know what I'm doing anymore because I'm not able to prospect on a golf course or a country club or things like that. So it's also just kind of like helping them understand that every discipline, regardless of what you do professionally, is undergoing major change these days. So they don't need to feel like they're on an island. You know, they do need to feel supported and heard and understood, but we have to kind of get to the baseline of what's not working for them in order to know how to help them.
Yeah, it goes right back to coaching, right? And like you have to be, this is the thing with marketing in general, like, because you're always having your existence questioned at some point in time during your fiscal year. Like you have to be the most persistent optimist ever. And when you're dealing with your hopeless sales rep, you have to be a persistent optimist. You have to go, no, man, you can do this. Trust me. I've seen this work. I know this works. I've seen the way. I know it seems like despair for you right now, but trust me, you don't need to even make a lot of huge changes in your behavior to make headway with this. And you definitely have to be an optimist to your sales rep, especially one who is where email or gosh, even more advanced tools like LinkedIn Sales Navigator is like such a foreign concept to them, and you know, getting them through that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. So that was, you mentioned something about networking, and that made me think of how I spent a lot of time talking about, okay, you used to go here, here, and here and physically network to get leads. What are you doing now? Nothing. Okay. Well, do you know that the way you just talk to strangers in those physical environments is not altogether different than how you can talk to strangers on LinkedIn?
Yeah, 100%.
So kind of like putting them side by side and saying, okay, this is what you do when you talk to a stranger at a cocktail party. You comment on things that are contextual to the environment because it's an icebreaker. So in a LinkedIn environment, you're commenting on things that are contextual to the environment. It's the same. It's just you have to understand the environment. And so we would go through a lot of exercises about how to do that with a stranger on LinkedIn.
Right. And I mean, I'll get into LinkedIn here in a little bit. I got a question from Alex actually that I want to bring up really quickly. Thanks for this question, Alex. Alex asks, as a content creator in an organization that is just starting content marketing for sales enablement, what would you focus on as the best bang for your buck to help your sales team? Where would you get started?
Best bang for your buck for your sales team. Just starting content marketing. I think I have a follow-up, like Alex, if you could qualify that just a little bit more. Are you asking about like the types of content, the mediums, or I'm not quite sure I fully understand the question. What types of content?
Okay. Yeah, what types of content?
Okay. Well, depending upon who it is that you're selling to, I think, you know, trying to understand just how B2B buyers are consuming content these days. One of the things that I started pushing for is we need more short form content. So I would start there, like looking at the information that exists in your asset library, and start hacking it apart for how can you take it and make it more relevant in short form. It's kind of like a low hanging fruit exercise because some budding content marketing teams need more time to plan, like developing webinars and podcasts and developing a content calendar and things of that nature. But I'm sure there are things that already exist. So dedicating some time to looking at what exists and how can you lift all of the relevant information and make it shorter form content and getting it into the hands of sales reps with instructions on how to leverage it and when to leverage it with who, so on and so forth, is a first step that I would probably take.
Yeah, I think the best bang for your buck early on, and Natalie nailed it. You guys have content already. Like, let's say you work in manufacturing, or maybe you work for another company. I'm sure your company at some point in time has contributed to a trade publication with a magazine article. Everyone in a stodgy industry like industrial does this, where they'll write a little article and they'll give it to their publisher and they'll publish it maybe 8 years ago, and you've probably never used it since. Go find that article and go repurpose it for yourself, and then let that be your starting point for content. That's a good low lift way to get content started for your sales team to use and distribute. You can brand it for yourself. You can break it out into shorter forms. You can make it into little slide decks, or make it into little infographics for yourself to give to your sales team. But that's where I would start before even looking at generating new content. I would go look at the content you must have somewhere in your marketing drive and figure out what you can make use of and expand upon.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Rachel has another question here. I'm loving the questions. Keep them coming, everyone, please. Rachel asks, what are your recommendations for onboarding new salespeople into this compared to selling an existing sales team on this type of strategy?
So onboarding newbies is going to be easier than selling your existing team on this approach. But what we were starting to focus on was a lot of these skills development things that I've already been over, like how to hack apart marketing content, DIY. We would record our own webinars. We would record sessions where we were just like walking people through how to do stuff. And then starting to give that to our newbies and say, here, watch this. So we'll touch base with you after you've consumed this content, but these are the things that we would expect out of a new sales professional working with marketing, working with sales enablement. And here's some value additive tools to add to your sales toolbox. And so that's one of the things that we were focusing on right out of the gate, is so that those new sales professionals weren't necessarily absorbing legacy bad habits, that they could then start working more effectively with your team and internally champion like working with your team with some of the people that had been around a lot longer.
All right. So measuring success. So we're talking about doing sales enablement, helping people break out content, coaching people up on what to do, which I do want to touch more on. But what does success look like? Talk to me about what each of these are supposed to do. How sales enablement is supposed to contribute to the bottom line of the org?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were a fairly new team, and that we were only about 2 years old. And so we spent the first year just trying to gather a baseline. How long was our sales cycle? How long did it take between engaging, starting to have engagement efforts with buyers, and then the first two-way response? So we did that for a year, just collecting the baseline so we could show our improvement over the next year. And that's where we were measuring our success, is ultimately like sales cycle. We wanted to reduce the timeline of sales cycle by having an enablement function. But we were able to show incremental progress by with specific accounts, with specific verticals, that we were reducing the time between, this was my first outreach attempt, and this is where the two-way engagement happened. And then time between first outreach attempt and meeting. So that's how we were measuring our success. And then, of course, content consumption, because we had to be just like content marketers. So we were looking at, what are people engaging with, the time on the page, all of the different metrics that content marketers would look at to know if the right ICP was consuming the content. And that was a way we could help coach our sales teams on how to follow up with these other assets based off of them spending 10 minutes on this page and 2 minutes on that page. That's kind of how we're going about that.
A question here from Mike. Mike asks about digital sales playbooks, and do you use them, and what's your take on them?
So we hadn't in the past. We were getting to a place where we were leveraging our use of SalesLoft as our playbook. And so we would build out our touch sequences in that technology so that we had easier reporting. We had some legacy sales reps that needed more of a physical, like a digital playbook. So we were also putting time and effort into developing those guides. We called them like play guides, and coaching to how they could use that in their sales motions as well.
Okay. I do love part of this distribution for small teams. You mentioned this to me when we prepped on this webinar, was about internal kind of communications via batch and blast email automation, or like or like an internal newsletter dedicated to sales enablement. I loved that idea. Can you talk a little bit about what you've done with that and how that's worked for you? Because I think for small teams who have trouble distributing content internally to their sales team, or you can't just like do it on Outlook or something like that. Like this is to me a really good way to first off make sure people are receiving it and consuming it, and then also just a good way to organize it for yourself as well, right?
Yeah, we were leveraging the Facebook product called Workplace inside of that company as a means of distribution, just distributing information. So in a situation where you had a product like that in place, or maybe you have an intranet, we had all of our sales reps in a group where we would regularly, every day, every other day, when there was something new that we needed to educate them about, we would distribute that channel. But I think in smaller, medium-sized businesses that don't have that kind of technology solution, if you are building a relationship with your sales team so that they know that they're not going to be blasted with 1,000 emails about stuff they have to keep up with, but they can regularly look forward to a once a week or once a month, whatever it makes sense for your organization, like aggregated email, or you're directing them to like a shared drive or something that everything is categorized in a way that's easy to find. It's a great way of distributing the information, but also, and this is the most important part, is like you have to be very prescriptive about whatever it is that you've prepared. It is for this audience, this particular product, this industry. This is where you would use it. This is how you use it. This is how you talk about it. And just kind of like fill the gap that exists in their mind between the amazing content you've developed and them being kind of a more, maybe in like an old school sales professional, where they're just like already comfortable with the show up and throw up, right? So they need more hand holding. They need you to be very prescriptive with them. And I found that they like that. They want that kind of level of coaching. So it's thinking about your content distribution, not only intelligently to get it in the hands of the sales rep, but it's also helping them understand what is significant about this content, why they should read it and be well versed in it, and then what to do with it.
I got nothing to add to that. Did y'all find that prescriptive thing valuable? Because that was awesome. I have nothing more to add to that. I completely agree with everything you say. I just love the concept of doing the newsletter, getting prescriptive about it, getting in a cadence about it as well. For weekly, monthly. If you have certain product groups, you can break it out by product group. So you have like, handhelds, robotics, laser, whatever it is you want to do. I'm obviously going back to the welding industry there, but just a good way for you, Katarina, you're welcome. It's just a good way for you to get that in front of the right people. You can also curate who that goes to. Obviously, if you have certain salespeople who are responsible for certain products versus other products, so you can kind of not just communicate effectively and be prescriptive, but also curate that prescriptive communication as well, to it goes to the right people, so they're getting something that is very much catered to them and what they do.
Yeah, and I also think that organizations of all size need some kind of digital asset management repository where you can search via keyword. That is critical these days, because that's how anyone finds anything. I mean, we're all using Google. So if I need to find content that was created a year ago, I need to be able to go to a place and search for it in my own company.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's tools out there that do that. I'll shamelessly plug BAM Sales Enablement because they sponsor my podcast, and they're made for industrial companies. But I mean, you want to have stuff for your team that can access it like in an offline mode or anything like that. But yeah, definitely having a little bit of operational tech behind it is a good thing. All right, so let's get into sort of the tips for the outreach sequences. So we're going to prime this, then we're going to get into these few examples, and then we're going to. We're going to get into it.
Yeah. So these are just some high level tips that I was pulling together a list over the last few years that I just kept dumping best practices into. That map pulled a few of the tips from for this slide, but basically, first of all, remove your I work for XYZ company hat and think, do I even want to read this? I wrote it. do I want to read this? Because if I don't want to read this, no one else is going to want to read it. And then I think I mentioned this earlier, use casual language, use contractions as much as you can when you're writing one-to-one communication, like a real human wrote it. And then the first line, the subject line in the first line of body copy, I think ends up being like 15 words, like 2 lines of copy that people are going to look at on their mobile device to determine in a split second, is this email worth opening and me reading? That is where you have to hook people or give some value. So I always tell my sales rep, do not use banal pleasantries. Just assume that everyone is well. Like, let's not spend a lot of time with like the nice salutations. Let's just get into why they should open this email. So using the first 2 lines really intelligently, making it more about them, less about you, paying attention to the I-you ratio in an email. If it's a lot of I, we, our company, and not enough about them, then that's a huge red flag. And that's something you can help clean up some of their email templates on pretty easily. And then be disarming and confront the obvious. I can't remember what that one was, Matt.
Oh, I added that for myself because I mean, obviously, you're a salesperson reaching out to someone. It's like, hey, I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. I'm a salesperson, but I am really here to offer help and assistance and guidance for you if necessary. But if you just confront the fact that, look, I'm a salesperson reaching out to you, it'll disarm them at least to probably listen to you if when they reach out. So I just think confronting the obvious that this is a sales outreach email, even though it's not necessarily asking for a meeting. But I do think that does disarm them to at least read through. I do think the subject line and the first line of the body copy are easily the most important things that you write. This goes all the way back to Dave Gerhardt stuff, which I know Natalie. Like, who would have thought that the words that you write matter on your email? But of course they do. So for me, subject line, you need a hook. You need something to speak to them directly. I like first line of body copy. I like to have a stat. Like, if you have a stat or something industry or some kind of something numerical to share about, like, 50% of medical devices fail inspection because of lack of sterilization or something like that, something that can immediately speak to a fear that they maybe have or something of that nature. Like, that's what you want first off. Like, you want to give them something to think about. And then obviously it may sound obvious to the marketers in here, like, oh, nobody in my company says we are our company, company X. Go read what your salespeople write in some of their emails and then be prepared to cringe because they almost all of them have it. And so you'll have to do a little bit of coaching on that. And then I always, of course, love the very, very low friction end question. Like, does that sound like your world, or is everything smooth sailing? Or do you think it would be the worst idea for us to talk for 15 minutes about this? Just like really low friction, just give them a chance to think about it at least. Josh Braun has so many great closing lines on emails. If you ever heard of him, not follow him. He does a really good job on that stuff. But yeah, I do agree with all this. And again, write like it's you. Your guy in North Dakota is going to sound different than your guy in Southern California. So make sure they sound like themselves, because they'll ultimately be more comfortable with that. Another thing I like on the outreach stuff is different mediums. So if they're going to use LinkedIn, for instance, to do outreach, like, teach them. Yeah, Josh Braun, Craig, that is his name. You got it right. I don't know if you're being sarcastic or not, but if you are, it's cool. Like, if you're using LinkedIn, use that microphone function, use some audio messages, like use video a little bit to your advantage. Like, obviously teach your guy to not do it like this, but, face it out like that for themselves, but use, Craig. Yes, Craig, it is Josh Braun. But yeah, use video or audio on channels like LinkedIn, anything to stand out. I can tell you with Gravy, when I was at the startup company, and we did a lot of sales outreach to SaaS companies, we used audio and video all the time to ice break with prospects before we sent them content or sales enablement pieces. And it works really, really well, because you know what, when you use your voice or when you use video, if they're comfortable with using video, much more of a relationship builder than text. So if you're using mediums aside from email, definitely look at varying up the medium by which you use.
Right. Hardly anyone's doing that right now.
No, I know.
LinkedIn
right?
is using the voice feature.
Nobody does it in industrial. It's crazy. Like, don't you think you would be able to communicate much more effectively talking like this than you could possibly do writing? Of course
Yeah.
you could. Like nobody uses it. It boggles my mind. I can tell you when I reach out to people to be guests on my podcast or to tell them I like what they're doing, that audio gets me a 60+% response rate. It's nuts because people like to hear people talk, and it's interesting. It's pattern disruption, right? That's why you're doing it.
Totally.
Okay. All right, so let's get into sales enablement sequences. So I like this first step because it's all about research. It's all about getting. So we're going to cover 4 examples here, and then we're just going to kind of go through sort of what the rest of that cadence looks like. We have an attachment for this at the end, so you guys can get all of this and all 17 steps with this much detail. This is made for the insurance industry, I believe. Natalie. You'll have to repurpose it for your industry, but the bones are all there.
Yeah, exactly. So just real quick, like the first step in any multi-touch sequence is research. You have to drill it into your sales professionals' heads all the time. They need to be researching because they have to customize, they have to personalize. So I was very prescriptive in writing the first research step about this is what you do, then you enter this in Salesforce. Yes, you do need to follow them on LinkedIn, but do not jump the gun and immediately send a connection request. So that is built into the touch sequence, but basically it's very prescriptive. You can modify this for your specific industry. Step 2. Oh, go ahead.
One thing I do want to keep in mind is like if you look up there, there's like research, email, there's going to be other steps here because what you're supposed to do is vary up your communication method. Don't just be an email jockey. You have to use other methods of communication because A, you don't know what they check the most. B, you don't know which medium they feel the most trust in when you make an outreach, and C, you just never know in what time of day, what kind of mood they're in, right?
You're exactly right, Matt. And the way we approached it was more of like a 360 surrounding the prospect with like all the different channels that we had at our disposal. I think direct mail should be worked back into this once people's physical locations are not their residences in the future, perhaps. But so step 2.
Not just any direct mail though. Like I would actually go through the trouble of like do something handwritten. Like get personal. Anyway, sorry.
Totally agreed. Yeah. So step 2, we were the kind of industry heavily reliant on email. So as you'll see, the 17-step touch sequence when you download that document, there are a lot of email steps, but the way we approached it in this particular example, we were targeting private equity firms for our property and casualty and our benefits related salespeople. But so a lot of this is examples of how you could use the jargon of the industry or the particular role that you're trying to sell into and reflect that back to them. But I keep the message punchy, short, concise, educational, value additive, less than 100 words, very short subject line. But yeah, the second step would be an email in this example.
Sure.
The next step I have is a call with voicemail, being very prescriptive about how you can coach them into what they should talk about when they're leaving a voice message. Keep it very brief. Leave your name and company twice. I like to use it to kind of set them up for, I'm going to send you something. So it's less, call me, I want to have a meeting with you. And it's more like, I'm going to give you something. So I'm just letting you know, FYI, if you want to call me, you can, but I'm letting you know I'm going to send another email and give you something valuable.
Right. And also the thing is you backtrack last steps too. It's not like, hey, I'm not just calling you blue. Hey, I emailed you a few days ago, asked you a quick question. Maybe you missed it. I'm sure you get a lot of emails. I'm going to send you another one with this. And then you obviously give yourself a door to follow up on with with them to see like if they found that valuable or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And so here's another step. It's using the same subject line. I like doing that in the touch point sequences that I make because threading them all together, I think with a specific subject line is really helpful over time. We got more open rates that way. But this one is just following up on the voice message that was left. Here's the document that I mentioned. Here's a summary of what it's about. Again, this is what we specialize in. And then asking a compelling question at the end, I think is a nice tactic that can plant a seed for that disruption that you're trying to do in the status quo part of their brain. And even though they might not follow up with you at this point in the sequence, you're educating them to a point of sales readiness.
Right. And so after that, I mean, first off, you can see it's really heavy in the beginning. There's like day 1, day 4, there's like 3 steps in day, 2 steps in day 4, 2 steps in day 1. After that, it's 7, 11, 13, 2 and 16. So you're definitely varying up, I guess, the pace. Right?
You are. We were trying to use more of the touches early on and then start spreading them out. So you're not harassing people, you're not making them annoyed with your outreach attempts. And then other in this example here would be like LinkedIn steps or direct mail or things of that nature.
Right. So let me ask you a quick question. So we talked about how to do this for like, I mean, I'm a big proponent of like matching everything up with your sales cycle when all you can. After the 30 days, I'm sure the frequency lessens, but what does it look like? Let's say you have a 6-month sales cycle.
So we would, there were 2 different approaches. You could take the individuals that did not respond in the set amount of time with this one-to-one touch sequence, and you could put them on a marketing list for nurturing over time. Or you could set another sequence for yourself called long-term nurture, where you send a one-to-one email once a month indefinitely, where you're just feeding them something that's relevant to their industry, their job, their whatever, so that you're continuing to educate them over a longer period of time, but it's less work for you. It's just you staying top of mind with them in your area of expertise.
Sure. One other note that I would make mention from a tip I got from Mike Tatum, who does Demand Gen at SurveyMonkey. It was a really good tip when he did downloads. And so when people would download stuff and they were doing they were doing basically email marketing, touch points and funnels, is match up to the content that they're downloading. And so like if they attended or registered for a webinar, you know, look at maybe sending them a video or another webinar recording if you're going to send them an additional piece of content, or they downloaded an ebook, maybe an infographic or a cut sheet of some kind would be useful to them as another kind of piece. So try to match up content with what they've historically downloaded is usually a good bet to make in terms of like they're probably a little bit predisposed to consuming content like that. So you can at least make the bet that maybe they would be able to do that. And so this does seem like, or it can be a lot of touch points. I would say, you know, it will vary industry to industry, and you can stretch it out or constrict it for what you did. This is simply for Natalie's case, what worked for her at her company. It would not, it's not like a like-to-like thing. It's merely a framework to execute based on your industry and what you think would be appropriate. But it is definitely a pretty useful framework as far as I'm concerned for how to do sales enablement and helping your sales team be more effective on these, on email and other channels where they're otherwise definitely not comfortable. All right, Natalie, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. So next webinar, real quick, guys, it's not June 1st, it's June 8th. This is the one that you all have been asking for, account-based marketing. All of you all asked me about account-based marketing. I got Daniel Engelbretson, who's the founder of Kronos, who's like one of the foremost terminus experts in the freaking world. Daniel Engelbretson is the man when it comes to account-based marketing. He did this for some company called Danaher, like one of the largest medical device manufacturers in the world. So Daniel Engelbretson knows account-based marketing inside out. He's going to walk you through how to do that on our next webinar. As far as this one goes, with Natalie, I'm going to send this recording to you all tomorrow. I will send the deck to you tomorrow. You will get the 17 touch outbound sequence. You're going to get these other attachments from Natalie, including one-to-one prospecting on LinkedIn, cold prospecting email tips. You all will be armed to help your salespeople do better on email and on other parts, better on sales enablement. Okay. That's Industrial Marketing Live for this week. Thank you all so much for joining us. Y'all have a great rest of your week. Natalie, again, thank you so much for helping out with me, helping out and being a guest.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Bye, y'all.